Okay, it's 11 a.m. UTC. I think we're just about ready to go. So yeah, going to start by just saying a really warm welcome to our 2020 NILM Workshop. We've had a lot of fun putting the agenda together. I hope you enjoy what's to come over the course of the day, and I really hope you find the content useful. I should probably start with just a brief definition of NILM, so talk about what the topic is and why we're here. So NILM stands for non-intrusive load monitoring, and this is really the problem of separating a building's energy consumption into individual loads. Now, this is also known as energy disaggregation, and really the non-intrusive component refers to the use of a single point of measurement and software or algorithms to separate this energy consumption into individual loads or appliances. And this is in contrast to intrusive load monitoring, where you might install one monitor per load or appliance within the home. But we're really talking about this non-intrusive case where you use a single piece of hardware installed at a single point of measurement. So throughout this workshop today, you're probably going to hear this problem discussed through a range of data rates, ranging from high frequency data collected at either thousands or maybe millions of times per second using bespoke hardware. You'll probably also hear other data rates from, say, 1 to 10 second data that you might be able to extract from a smart meter over a home area network or a local network. But you also might hear discussions around 15-minute or 30-minute data. This data is typically available from smart meters, but over a wide area network as well, or also referred to as AMI data. And really, I think NILM is sort of the same problem, but it sort of changes depending on different data rates and different hardware that's used. That's what we'll be discussing today. In terms of setting your expectations for what's to come in this workshop, I just want to start with talking about what's come before. So there are two workshop series that I want to draw your attention to. There's the International NILM Workshop Series, which has been held every other year since 2012, hosted in North America. And this workshop has had like an academic focus in which potential presenters will write papers, submit them, they'll be peer reviewed, and agendas will be built from there. I also want to draw your attention to the European NILM Workshop, which has been held every year since 2014, starting in London and then moving to Germany and Greece last year. This workshop has more of a balance between academia and industry. Attendees have split roughly 50-50 between the two groups. And this conference doesn't have a paper review process or anything like that. But really what we are doing today is the amalgamation of these two workshop series. So we are bringing both together, the International and the NILM Workshop together as this virtual conference. Now, I think sort of previously when I've spoken to people who have attended these conferences, I think it makes a lot of sense to host separate physical conferences where maybe it's hard to justify travel from one continent to another. We all have constraints on time and money and so on. But actually, when you look at the global pandemic and what's happened this year, it makes a lot more sense to unite these two conference series when we're talking about virtual conferences. So that's exactly what we're doing today. We've brought these two conference series together. And we're actually like really excited by the response we've got from this. We've had over 300 registrations for this conference, and I saw across Zoom and YouTube before starting this presentation, we already have 150 people joining online now. And I think that already makes it the largest NILM event that has ever been hosted. So that's really cool. It's good to know that what we're doing is going in the right direction, and also good to know that the NILM community is alive and well and still values these sorts of workshops. I then want to introduce you to the organizing committee for this conference. So this is an 8-person strong committee and spread across the world, but I think most of the organizers are on this call, although I don't think the caffeine has landed for some of them. Obviously, it's still quite early in some parts of North America at the moment, which is why I'm kicking you off from sunny London. But there are a few groups I want to draw your attention to. Along the top, we've got our general co-chairs, David, Stefan, and Nikki, who've really been instrumental in making sure the conference is going in the right direction, but also setting this whole process up, getting the ball rolling, and building the relationship with the BuildSys conference, which I'll come on to in a moment. So I mentioned that this conference is also the amalgamation of the international workshop and also the European workshop teams. So this is split between David, Stefan, and Mario on the international side, and Nikki, Lina, Peter, Dimitros, and myself on the European side. And then lastly, I want to highlight our TPC chairs. So this is Mario and Lina, who have been managing the paper submission process and peer review process, And Lina is going to give an update on exactly this process in just a moment. But I mentioned the relationship between the NILM 2020 conference and the BuildSys conference. I want to jump into that in a bit more detail now. So NILM 2020 is a BuildSys workshop, and it's quite common for academic conferences like BuildSys to have a number of smaller, more focused workshops, which slightly confusingly called workshops. Is a bit of a misnomer. They're basically run like mini conferences, typically one-day events where you'd have a smaller group of people discussing a more focused agenda. So that's exactly what NILM 2020 is, but this year it is now a BuildSys workshop. So what does that mean in practice? So if we weren't under a global pandemic, this meant that the workshop would have been physically co-located in Japan with BuildSys, which would have been really exciting. Very sad that that isn't possible, but hey, gotta work with what you've got. I also want to draw your attention to BuildSys's dedicated session to non-intrusive local monitoring, and this is in addition to the content that's going to be discussed today. So this session is going to be run at 9:20 on Friday this week, and it will be run in 2 different time zones. It will be run in Japan Standard Time and Eastern Standard Time. So you can tune into whichever stream works best for your local time zone. So if you want more information on the agenda and joining instructions for that session at BuildSys, I'd encourage you to check out the BuildSys website. And finally, another point of our collaboration with BuildSys this year is that the NILM 2020 papers will be published by the ACM under the BuildSys conference. So what does this mean? So academics and their institutions are, or at least one way of evaluating them is by looking at the places they publish. And publishing papers at a conference which has proceedings published by like a recognized body like the ACM carries a lot more weight than if you were to have just put the papers online, which is what we've done previously with the NILM conference. So that's really cool. It feels like we're going in the right direction, and as the NILM community has sort of matured, and I hope this is useful to academics this year, and also in future if we do something similar again. So I also want to talk you through the agenda for what you can expect today. So obviously this agenda is on the NILM Workshop website, but I just want to highlight a few details now. So after this introduction, we're going to be jumping into our first technical session, which is going to be 4 10-minute videos. So these talks will be delivered as videos, but each talk is going to be followed by a live Q&A session. So I'll give more details about how Q&A is going to work in a moment. But yeah, these talks can be delivered as videos, and we'll follow that with live Q&A. We'll then have a 1-hour lunch break, which I apologize if this lunch break does not align with your local time, but yeah, that will at least allow us to set up some of the tech for this afternoon, and hopefully things will run smoothly. And then after this lunch break, we're going to be jumping into a live keynote with Joanna Matthew from the University of Michigan. So I'm really excited to see this keynote. So I think Joanna is going to be talking about the intersection of NILM and demand response, and also the application to these sorts of solutions to NILM-like problems, for example, feeder level disaggregation. So really excited to see Joanna talk. That's going to be a live keynote, and we're also going to follow that with some live Q&A as well. Then moving on to the short talk session. So this is going to be a series of 13 3-minute videos. And we're going to jump straight into the industrial demo session after that. So I'm afraid there isn't time to do Q&A for each of those talks. But the industrial demos session will be, again, a video session where we'll have 2 3-minute talks and 1 10-minute talk. And then finally, the last kind of official session of the day is going to be the technical session 2, which will be following exactly the same format as the first technical session, 4 10-minute videos, each of which followed by 5 minutes of live Q&A. Now, because we have sort of a global audience, we've done our best to sort of centralize the time zone of the conference based on the time zones of the presenters, so making sure that they don't end up doing a Q&A at a time which is really unsociable for them. So you'll notice that we haven't grouped the talks in sessions according to topic, like maybe we would have done if we had a physical conference, but instead we've grouped them based on where they are in the world to make sure that the presenters are talking and doing Q&A, or rather we're watching videos and doing Q&A at a time which is sociable for the presenters. And then finally, at 4:30 p.m. UTC, we're going to be jumping into a networking event via GatherTown. So this is going to be really interesting. I'm going to give a couple more details on this in just a moment, but I think we'll really circulate the information towards the end of the day, but so stay tuned for that. Okay, so that's the agenda and the topics I wanted to cover today. In terms of how to join this event, so you're probably watching this event via either Zoom or YouTube at the moment, and sort of these different technologies have different advantages. So with Zoom, you will be able to participate in the Q&A session after some of the talks. So please do use the Q&A feature rather than the chat to submit your questions, and we'll do our best to get them answered. You can also, and might have also joined via YouTube. So if you're joining via YouTube, you won't be able to participate in the Q&A session, but you are able to pause and rewind the video. So this is super useful if you want to take a lunch break at a time that doesn't match up with the conference or whatever, or maybe rewind to watch some more of a talk that you might have missed. So yeah, if you're on Zoom, you can always check out YouTube and vice versa. YouTube is available publicly, obviously, but the Zoom link you will need to register for the NILM Workshop if you haven't done already, and we've extended that registration, so it's still available at the moment. So I mentioned the Q&A that's going to follow some of the talks, and I just want to give some instructions for the participants. So we're going to have live Q&A after both technical sessions and the keynote, and please submit your questions via the Zoom's Q&A feature, and that's different from just the normal chat that you see on the right-hand side. I'm afraid we're not going to have time to do Q&A for the short talks and the industry demos. We have a lot of videos that are going to follow in quick succession, but please do join the conversation on Slack, and I'll give more details in a moment on that. And the idea with these Q&A sessions is that the session chair will coordinate the questions. Basically, they'll read out the written questions that are submitted and allow the presenter to respond to them. However, if we can't make sense of the question, or if it requires a bit of back and forth, we might ask the person who asked the question to unmute their microphone and to be able to discuss it with the presenter directly. In terms of some Q&A information for presenters, please make yourself known to the host team when in the chat when your session begins, basically when the whole session begins or when your video begins. During that session, the presenter will be made a panelist, and this will allow them to unmute their microphone and respond to questions. But obviously don't do that until the video is over, or you'll end up talking over your talk. But just a word of warning, when you are made a panelist, your Zoom session will automatically restart and bring you into the room. So don't be alarmed, this is expected, and it's not anything dropping out. It's just how Zoom works when you make someone a panelist, which will allow you to unmute your microphone. So that's information for presenters. I also want to highlight a couple of hashtags and handles on Twitter you might want to use. So you can tweet using the NILM 2020 and the BuildSys 2020 hashtags, but also you might want to follow the NILM Workshop Twitter handle and the NILM Alert handle. And these will give you some information about what's happening during this conference today, but also give you alerts for similar conferences in the future. Okay, so I mentioned the Slack workspace. So BuildSys has set up a specific workspace for the whole BuildSys conference, not just the NILM Workshop. But in order to get access to that, you need to register for the BuildSys 2020 conference. So you can find that on the BuildSys website. Just Google BuildSys 2020 and you'll find it. Register for the event, and you'll receive a confirmation email which has an invite link to the Slack workspace. So once you have joined that workspace, you can then access Slack through the web app or download the Slack client. But crucially, you want to look for the channel within that workspace called W08 NILM. Now there are a lot of channels in this BuildSys workspace. I think they have one for every session or every paper that's being presented at the conference. So you'll need to scroll down through this long list of channels, look for W08 NILM, which is where we'll be discussing this conference. So just a couple more details. On the NILM Workshop website, you can find at the moment links to the papers. So if you just click on the title of any of these presentations, you'll get linked to the paper behind that. So you can read that to gain more information if you're interested in a particular presentation. And also after this event, we'll be uploading the videos from each talk to YouTube, and we'll also be linking to those videos from this website. So if you want to get access to either the papers or the videos that you've seen today, the NILM Workshop website is the place to do that. Now, finally, I mentioned the networking event that will start at 4:30 p.m. UTC, and we're going to be using a tool called GatherTown for this. Now, I sort of tried to use Galatown last night just to get an idea for how it works. It's a really interesting tool where you basically can walk around a map, and builders have constructed a specific map for the conference. The one that you see here is just like, I think it's from the demo area. And you can walk around this conference and interact with other participants with audio and video. So that's really cool. It tries to simulate the sort of real life networking that you might do at a conference, where you bump into people on the way to the bar and so on. So I think that's pretty much all the details I wanted to cover. I'm now going to hand over to Lina to talk about the paper submission process and how we constructed the agenda. Lina, over to you.
Thanks, Ollie. So here, Mario and I were coordinating the efforts on the technical program, gathering the papers and so on. I'll just briefly describe how we did that. So interestingly, we had 34 papers submitted. That was a good number. And we made sure that each paper received at least 2 to 3 reviews, followed by an online discussion period by the TPC of about a week, where we commented on the reviews to make sure that it was all fair and solid. We accepted 21 out of these 34 papers based on the reviews and their technical merit, essentially. And these papers are going to be published by the ACM proceedings, just to make sure that when you reference these papers, you use the citation that has been provided by the ACM, for example, below the 5th International Workshop on NILM, blah, 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 as opposed to what we didn't do before. So now we have a proper reference with a DOI, etc. So these 21 papers are broken down into 8 10-minute talks across the 2 technical sessions. And these 10-minute talks are really there to provide thought-provoking concepts and more advanced findings, and quite interesting ones as well. The rest would be short talks, and they are more focused on initial and promising findings with different application areas as well. We'll also have a very exciting keynote on new NILM problems and application to power systems after lunch. Don't miss that. And 2 industrial demos and a video on the IEC standardization for NILM. So just some statistics, which I find quite interesting. NILM EU has always had a large industrial presence. So there will be 3 short talks from industry, 2 industrial demos, and 1 talk on IEC standardization from industry. But you will see that many other papers are also making their work industrially relevant by looking at real application areas, realistic sampling rate data that we might get, and so on. This conference is truly international. We had a large European contribution, but North American as well as Asia. For both the demos and the technical proceedings. So I mentioned some exciting technical contributions. What we found interesting is we had a good mix of contributions from the methodology point of view. There was a strong focus on deep learning based NILM. We know that's where the trend is right now, but other machine learning methods as well, matrix and tensor methods, Bayesian methods, even GSP methods, quite interesting. So that's on the methodology itself. We saw some new application areas, dairy farms. That's the first time I've heard of it, which is great. I'm looking forward to that. But heating as well, solar, small to medium enterprise type NILM problems, addressing low resolution NILM, which is what smart meter data will look like. There were also some very interesting contributions in terms of data handling. This is always a big issue for NILM. We have quite a lot of data sets, and that's great. We have a lot to tap into. How do we make the most of it? How do we annotate it? Can we think about the best way of selecting the best amount of data for training? That's what I mean by truncation, and different pre-processing methods for the data prior to NILM. There's also a new concept being presented this morning on explainability of NILM algorithms. So that's something that is coming to fore now with NILM. And of course, we want to thank our TPC members, without whom all this reviewing of papers, doing it on time, making sure they could review all the papers, and it was fantastic working with you all. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Ollie. If you have any questions, please pass it on the chat, I guess, on the Q&A.
That sounds great. I'm going to stop showing my screen for the moment. If we have any questions, stick them in the Q&A section, and we'll start the next session at 11:30 UTC.